Note that this episode contains depictions of sexual abuse, suicide, and self-harm that some people may find disturbing. Please take care of yourself.
Across humanity, stories witness us, and through them we see, we hear, and we grow. I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Peter Rizzi, and this is Book Feels, a podcast about how books made us feel and how we feel about books. Today we're going to be talking about The Catcher in the Rye, written by J.D. Salinger and published in 1951. This novel follows Holden Caulfield, who's a teenage boy who has just gotten expelled from yet another prep school. He has a discouraging goodbye with one of his teachers, Mr. Spencer, and some fights with his schoolmates, and then ultimately decides he's had enough and leaves the school on the next train to New York a few days before he's going to be sent home by the administration. And over the course of a day or two in New York, Holden essentially spirals into self-destruction. In the end of the book, he ends up in a facility speaking to psychiatrists where he learns that he's been enrolled in yet another prep school in the fall. There's a lot to unpack in this book. Some of the scenes we're going to discuss are his fights with his schoolmates, particularly with his roommate Stradlater, before he leaves his old school, Pensy. We're also going to talk about his relationship with his love interest, Jane. We're going to talk about his run-in with a sex worker, some run-ins with his teachers as well, Mr. Spencer and Mr. Antolini, then at the end of the book. I first read this book as a teenager, and I don't think it was ever assigned school reading, more just something I picked up. And I didn't remember a lot about it until I read it again for this podcast. And again, I enjoyed it, but it was pretty tough read, kind of a gut punch, just how much Holden is going through. Pauline, I know you have kind of a long and windy history with this book. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah. I think that I've read the book 3 times. The first when I was 11 and the second when I was 14. And I didn't really like it either time. I thought Holden was kind of annoying. And then when I was a teenager, I found his kind of rebel without a cause shtick a little generic. But, I felt for some reason called to read it again when I was 26 and I was at home in California for my grandfather's funeral. And in Buddhist tradition, you're not supposed to cry because I think that it's something to do with if you cry, at least according to my family, then their spirit will not move on to the next life. I am somebody who feels deeply, and I just felt so alone, not being able to grieve. One of the few people in my family who I was kind of close to and who saw me and who also believed in me and more for me. So I felt weirdly called to read The Catcher in the Rye. Like I saw it and I just was like, I'm going to read it again. And that time around, all I could see in that book was grief. Like all of it was just about grief, like grief about his brother, grief about being alone, everything. And
you were channeling your grief into your reading of it.
Yeah, like I finally felt seen and held by this book in a time where I wasn't either of those things.
It's so interesting to me that this book didn't stand out to you when you were younger, and yet here you find yourself in this similar position as Holden where you're experiencing grief and can't express it. And somehow this book that you didn't like very much called to you. I just wonder what that 11 or 15-year-old Pauline had remembered about this book to bring you back to it.
I think that deep down, and I believe this with a lot of literature and with art in general, that this is how humans communicate to each other through the centuries, because we all have this basic humanity of everything, of compassion, of anger, of joy, of wisdom, of truth, and I think that that's why I love books. And I think that something in me has just been connected to this book. And I'm just so glad that, I believe in a higher power, and I'm glad that a higher power brought this book into my life again, especially in a moment where I really needed it. And I feel, reading it this time around, just so much more adult. And still, there's a part of me that will always identify with the pain of Holden and there's, I have an inner child in me. I have an inner suffering teenager in me. But instead of wanting to being Holden and wanting to be held, I felt like I was the adult who wanted to hold Holden.
Sure.
So,
I think we both felt
yeah.
a bit that way reading this book. Like,
Yeah.
we just really wanted to give Holden something. We just felt so much for that poor boy.
I know. So we're going to get into that. And oh boy, what a ride.
So let's start by talking about the title of the book. We don't really figure out what the meaning is until later.
Right.
I don't remember exactly what prompts Holden to mention this, but he kind of has this vision of he's out in a rye field and there's all these kids playing. They're like on the cliff. This rye field is on the side of a cliff. He wants to be the one that catches them before they fall off the cliff and allows them to keep playing.
This actually comes from off the back of Phoebe asking him what he wants to do with his life. And a lot of people throughout the book are asking him what he wants to do with his life. And he is more focused on the past of this loss of innocence, loss of the past. And I think that the title itself, this idea of him being the quote unquote catcher in the rye, is really his way of wanting to preserve innocence. He's very concerned about Phoebe's innocence, for example, and I think he mourns his own loss of innocence.
It's a great observation, and everyone in this book just wants Holden to move on. No one wants to go with Holden into the past, into the grief and loss he's experienced.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say here that Holden is trying to assume this position of responsibility. He wants to be the one who is, quote unquote, catching these children, because nobody's there to catch him. But I think it's important to say, and Peter, I think you'll agree, that Holden is still a kid, and children are not responsible for being protectors, for protecting their own innocence. That's not something that they're capable of, and Holden certainly isn't capable of that.
And yet it's a role children find themselves fulfilling when adults who are supposed to protect children fail. And this book is full of adults who fail to protect Holden. And so, yeah, Holden wants to fill this gap, even though you're right, he can't. He's a kid, and it's really tragic.
The structures and the adults in Holden's life not only don't protect him, but they also don't see him. They don't witness him. And I think that, obviously we do want to talk about the title. I think that the theme of loss of innocence is one of the primary readings of this book, besides the other reading of sort of teenage angst and teenage anger. But to me, the book really reads more about grief and the lack of witnessing of Holden's grief from his caretakers.
A few years ago, I lost a very dear friend from my hometown who passed away. We're both young. We're both in our 20s. And after that happened, I actually couldn't go home for a few years. And those feelings certainly stirred up inside me when I was reading about Holden's loss of his brother,
Right.
Allie. And to me, that loss of his sibling, really connecting with, him having to grow up so fast, him losing this innocence, having this longing for a childhood, a home, a safe place. And, from what we read of the book, he doesn't really have anyone who can be there to help him process losing a sibling at 10 years old, 12 years old, however old he is. He experiences this grief, and then he's sent off to prep schools. He's sent away.
Yeah.
To go and exist with this pain among other prep school boys. In what? This is the 1950s and 1960s, and what seems like there's such a hostile environment to experience that loss without some guidance, without some support. I think it's really clear that Holden is struggling to express his grief, to feel his grief, to make sense of it. I mean, even in just the way J.D. Salinger writes the book, he keeps saying, Holden will say, I almost felt like I could cry, but I didn't know why. when this happened, I felt so depressed all of a sudden. I had no idea why. And he literally cannot connect his very real feelings of grief with a genuinely awful experience he endured. And something I see in the book that I certainly connect with is, you know, the only way for boys, particularly of his era, of the 50s and 60s, to express grief, to express emotion is through fighting.
Yeah.
And he gets in fights. He's not a big guy. He's not an aggressor. He is inviting fights. He is inviting literally being beaten and pummeled.
I think something that's relatable in all of us, like there's this like physical need or like a need to harm yourself physically or to hurt physically when you're hurting emotionally, because it's like your brain can't compute. So your body has to compensate to understand the pain, the utter wild pain that you're in.
It's like a complete visceral experience. And that's what Holden is inviting. He's getting mad at Stradlater. Stradlater starts hitting him, and Stradlater says something along the lines of, "Hey, you need to shut your mouth or I'm going to beat you even harder." And Holden starts calling him even more names.
Yeah.
He's inviting that physical punishment, and then he starts crying.
Holden has so much pain in him, and it has to come out somehow. And it came out through a fight. It came out through another fight. And then it comes out through another fight. And he's such a puny guy. He says it himself that he's like super scrawny, kind of weak. And yet he keeps putting himself in. Actually, that reminds me of, I'd love to read a passage.
Please.
All right. He's talking about Allie, and this is the first time in the book that he references Allie and how Allie's his kid brother who died. He says, "God, he was a nice kid, though. He used to laugh so hard at something he thought of at the dinner table that he just about fell off his chair. I was only 13 and they were going to have me psychoanalyzed and all because I broke all the windows in the garage. I don't blame them. I really don't. I slept in the garage the night he died and I broke all the goddamn windows with my fist just for the hell of it. I even tried to break all the windows of the station wagon we had that summer, but my hand was already broken and everything by the time, and I couldn't do it. It was a very stupid thing to do, I'll admit, but I hardly didn't even know I was going to do it. And you didn't know, Allie." So just this, I don't know, just this image of this really young boy who is in like the throes of probably the most intense grief he's ever, like a human can experience. I think one of the most intense griefs a human can experience. And nobody's helping him. No. And I just imagine him breaking windows and breaking his hand.
Yeah. Glass coming through the fingers.
And he keeps going because he hurts so much that he needs to hurt his body because the hurt needs to come out somehow. And that image really sticks with me whenever my grief comes up about my past. And how unfair life can be. Like, it was really unfair that Holden's brother got cancer and died. That's really fucking unfair. Yeah. And some of the stuff that's happened to me, I think about it and I just feel it, not, less now because I've worked on it a lot, but particularly, in the beginning of my healing journey, I think I really just felt it like it was like a wild beast in me, and it needed to come out somehow. And I think that Thich Nhat Hanh has said kind of often that grief and suffering, and anger, if you can't transform it into creation, it comes out as destruction.
Sure.
And that's just kind of, I see Holden destroying the things around him, the people around him, his relationships, and then ultimately his own body.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess actually that, that kind of goes into this kind of self-destructive pattern that he's in. Like, he's just somebody, I think, who's really running from that grief. And that's something I so relate to.
Of course.
Who hasn't?
No one wants to feel the immense grief, anger, pain of losing someone that close. It's almost impossible to feel, especially if you're alone with it, like Holden is.
Yeah. Like, again, going back to this like that, him breaking all the windows in the garage, like no one held him. No one, like his parents did not talk to him.
They pathologized him. They sent him away.
Yes, they sent him away to
What's wrong with
scientist.
Holden?
Yeah, and it's like, nothing's wrong with this kid. Nothing. No. He is reacting in a perfectly normal way, actually. He's in incredible pain. So I think that, we're taught like pretty early to channel our pain into something else and to put it away somewhere or to solve it somehow
Right.
versus just being with it. I think a lot of people don't teach their children how to be with their pain because they
No.
themselves don't necessarily know how to do that.
No.
And I think that continues with Holden throughout the book. It feels like he's running from his pain. There's a passage where he engages with a sex worker, a guy, I guess I don't know what the proper term is, her handler, her manager, sees him in an elevator at his hotel. He's like the bellhop at the hotel or something. And he asks, if he's looking for a good time that night. And Holden says, sure. And the whole time he's going back to his room, he's like, I don't know why I did that. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. It's like everything about it just seems so terrible. And it escalates to, Maurice, this handler, beating him up.
Yep.
And him kind of dissociating and kind of, like pretending he has like this gunshot wound. And he just keeps chasing excitement and hurting himself at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think in order to stay like just one step ahead of his grief and because I think once the grief engulfs him, he'll have a mental breakdown, which is what happens at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it happens at the end of the book, but it manifests throughout the book on this, basically binger he's on. What is this, like 48 hours? All this stuff happens in, right? And yeah, this rejection by Maurice, getting beat up by Maurice, this experience with Sonny, the sex worker, is the first clearest time where Holden expresses suicidality, where I think he says something along the lines of, and what I thought about in that moment was jumping out the window and killing myself. And the only reason I didn't do it was because I thought of all the people who'd be rubbernecking, looking at me. He's like imagining his own funeral. And that's the only thing that keeps him from not taking his own life.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of a passage that I'd love to read, unless you would like to read it. So this is him sitting in Central Park, just in the dark in December in New York.
Poor kid.
I know. Someone take care of this child. I started thinking about how old Phoebe would feel if I got pneumonia and died. It was a childish way to think, but I couldn't stop myself. She'd feel pretty bad if something like that happened. She likes me a lot. I mean, she's quite fond of me. She really is. Anyway, I couldn't get that off my mind, so finally what I figured I'd do, I figured I'd sneak home and see her, in case I died and all. So this idea of him imagining what if he died, like how people would react. I really relate to that. I actually, my own kind of experience with suicidal ideation started really, really young when I was around 12-ish. And I used to also imagine my funeral. And I used to, that was the only way I would feel cared for. And it's just, I think that it just shows the lack of love in Holden's life. And I think that so many people can relate to that. I certainly can relate to it.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. So you talked about how kind of Holden's mental crisis, we really find out about the end of the book that he's now in a psychiatric unit and talking with doctors and sort of things. But right before that ending, is this really raw moment of both, again, the suicidality and connecting to his brother, Allie, who he lost. And he says, then I started doing something else. Every time I'd get to the end of a block, I'd make believe I was talking to my brother, Allie. I'd say to him, Allie, don't let me disappear. Allie, don't let me disappear. Allie, don't let me disappear. Please, Allie. And then when I reached the other side of the street without disappearing, I'd thank him. And I mean, it's just such a tender moment, both of the suffering that Holden is experiencing coming to light, where he's literally crossing New York City blocks and can't imagine himself making it to the other side. Yeah. And also this raw connection with Allie, where he's speaking to him directly as if he were there. And he does this at different times in the book. He remembers this, or he brings up this memory of this one time he was going to shoot BB guns with his neighbor and he left Allie behind. And he kind of imagines himself reaching back to Allie and bringing him with him on that trip. And I just really connect with Holden's way of relating with someone he's lost. And I think most people who've lost someone close to them have done this, have thought about a memory, maybe even a memory of this one like Holden, where maybe he feels some blame, some guilt about not doing more, not being more. imagine going back and rewriting how that memory could have gone, and also just talking to him. I mean, we could talk about however many different religions or forms of spirituality we want that talk about, the people who we've lost in this life still being around and with us. And
Mhm.
I talked to my friend Will, who I lost. I think of him and talk to him, and it keeps him alive in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I ask what you've talked to him about?
it's mostly just been like this extending a hand, this like really just giving a hug, and like,
Mhm.
yeah, just connecting,
Yeah.
holding.
Mm. Do you ever do you feel him with you ever, or I don't know.
I think I see Will in really beautiful moments.
Mhm.
Um, I'm brought back to like when I first moved to Boston a few years ago. It was frankly pretty soon after Will's funeral, and I was just standing along the Charles River one day,
Mhm.
and there was a nice sunset. And it's moments like that, for me with Will, it really brought up like this trip that we'd done to New York City together. He and
Mm.
I had gone to New York City together after our senior year of high school as this kind of celebration. And I'm looking at the skyline of Boston and seeing this sky and just thinking of him. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of my way of remembering him.
Mm. It feels like, that's not something necessarily I relate to. I mean, obviously, like my grandfather passed away, and he was somebody I loved very much, but he passed away when he was like 95 or 96.
Yeah.
It didn't feel it always hurts, but it doesn't feel as tragic, I think, or as shocking as you maybe feel with your friend, or as Holden feels with Allie, because I think that there's a kind of, I mean, I hear so much like love and peace in the way you approach your connection, your continued connection with Will, even if, he isn't alive anymore, you still have this connection with him. And obviously you are not Holden, you're not alone. You have also so many tools at your disposal, and Holden does not. But I hear that this connection is important for you and like helps you, and I think the same goes for Holden in that beautiful and really tragic scene of him unraveling, that Allie was who loved him,
Hmm.
and that connection was the only thing that was keeping him going.
With death, there is so much loss, so much pain, and also a lot of beauty of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And in Holden's moment of mortality, where he sees himself dying, he can lean on this connection that spans beyond just this life.
Yeah.
Um, and like the death of a friend, um, it's been a huge loss. It was, like you said, tragic is really the right word because he was too young. Um, and at the same time, it opens up doors to a new way of relating with the world, a new spiritual outlook on life for me. And I only hope Holden could find that. I don't know if he will. I don't know if he does.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tough with that era. And we'll get to that part in the book as well about just how I think things end up for him, unfortunately. But
Mm,
I think that, you know, what I am glad for is that even though you lost somebody, it sounds like you loved him and he loved you, as much as you could express that. Because, obviously you were young teenage boys
yeah,
together, and that's hard. But I know from what you've told me, he was somebody who, like, if you were to talk about the hard stuff, it would have been with him.
absolutely.
And I think that with Holden, like, just imagining this beautiful child that he had in his life, this brother of his, with a mitten, like with a baseball mitt, like with
Mm.
pomes written on
I
it.
bet you connected with that.
I
Your love of
loved that.
poetry.
Oh my God, that's my shit. No, but sorry, just getting a little riled up here on a kind of a serious topic. But yeah, no, I just like that person is the one sensitive soul in his life who is also sensitive and not just sensitive, but also like doesn't want anything from him, doesn't try to take anything from him. He just is his brother, and
Right.
I'm so sad for Holden that he lost his brother, but I'm also glad that he had a brother like that.
Mm.
So something that I did want to cover off was, I think the sexual abuse
Yeah.
aspect of the book. I think it's pretty intense. I think that's definitely something I completely missed when I first
Totally.
read the book.
It's easy to.
There are two scenes in particular that I'm thinking of. There's one where Holden and Jane are playing checkers, and her stepdad comes out and just kind of like is gross and weird.
Yeah.
And she doesn't react to him at all. She completely ignores him. And then she just like kind of starts crying.
Mhm.
And Holden holds her and kind of and like pesters her with the question, like, did he make a pass at you? You know, like that's the first thing he thinks
Yeah,
about.
like Holden knew.
Yeah. And I, you know, as somebody who has kind of experience with sexual abuse and trauma, I think that folks like that do have a sixth sense
Mhm.
of like who else could be a victim around them or who's vulnerable around them.
Mhm.
And that's maybe why Holden is so focused on protecting vulnerable
Yeah.
children. And
Maybe also
innocents.
who's a predator.
Related to that, the second incident I want to talk about was with his teacher,
Mr. Antolini,
Mr. Antolini, creepy Antolini.
Italian fella.
Yeah.
Not doing us proud.
Peter's Italian or part Italian.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a creepazoid. Sorry. I think I really felt it this time around reading the book. Like
Yeah.
just this man drinking so much with what Holden is 16, 17. He's a kid and he's there at like midnight. He's there really late and he himself is probably pretty drunk and not within. Also, he's been kicked out of school. Like, he's a vulnerable kid. He's so vulnerable. And Mr. Antolini's just drinking up, just like, you know, pouring shots, giving himself highballs. And he's left alone with Holden. Like, his wife goes to bed and Holden falls asleep. And he wakes up with Mr. Antolini stroking his hair in the dark. So fucking creepy. And
So creepy.
He talks about how, like, stuff like that has happened to him his whole life.
Yeah.
And I think it's because Holden has always been vulnerable. And so people find vulnerable populations on purpose to do stuff like that.
And sex generally is a pretty big theme in this book. He's at the bar one time and he's like watching this buff, I don't know, I call him like a buff football guy. I don't know, like touching his girlfriend underneath the table and she's saying no and he like won't stop. And so Holden certainly has a sixth sense for distressing, non-consensual sexual experiences that fill this book.
And you had a theory. You were talking about something about Holden maybe was doing.
I read this interpretation of the book online that is basically saying, yeah, there's this, you know, there's sexual abuse and non-consent all around Holden. He has probably been a victim of sexual abuse, just kind of based on this reading of
Sure.
You know, what happens to Mr. Antolini, and then he says, oh, this has happened to me 20 or so times over the years. And people are looking at the relationship with Holden and Phoebe and talking about, well, Holden always comments on her appearance, how cute she is, likes to dance with her. There's a scene in when he visits her in her bedroom where he says, and then 1 second later, I pinched her butt just because I felt like it.
I appreciate that you're willing to talk about the theories that you read, because I think that as much as Holden is vulnerable, Phoebe is vulnerable.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
She probably
we don't
also
want to overlook that.
Yeah, like similarly, like to Holden, who has nobody, she probably also has no one except Holden. And Holden is a really hurt and broken person who isn't getting the help he needs. And I think that people like that, you know, yours truly included, can hurt others. And it's very possible that he could do that.
Absolutely.
Obviously, that's not necessarily, that's a pretty, like, it's an interpretation of the book. Like, it's not like a fact of the book. There's no like explicit scene there, but I think that it's not an unfair reading. I think it's a very realistic and whole reading of something.
Gosh, Pauline, we're talking about loads of sexual abuse, sexual trauma, suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
Holden getting pummeled. Can you see why this book felt like a gut punch to me?
I understand.
Oh my gosh.
I understand.
There is so much pain, so much suffering in this book. And for me, it's hard to read this and not feel a little hopeless.
Yeah.
It was written, I don't know what year it was written. It was written a while ago, more than 60 years ago.
Yeah.
It makes me think of my parents' generation, my parents' parents' generation. On honestly with some compassion
Yeah.
for how rough things were in schools, in communities, in families, how little support and tools they had. Um, I mean, here we are as 20 something, 30 somethings doing a podcast about our feelings about books. And it's just hard to think about people who didn't have that. And I look around the world and I see so much violence. I see
Yeah.
um the things that are being talked in this book still happening, and it's like why? Like but
Yeah.
we know why. It's this trauma, it exists everywhere, and it stays around until someone heals it.
Yeah. And it takes it takes a village.
Does.
It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a village to heal a child,
It
I
does.
think. And we all need to heal children, whether they're inner children or not. And I think that actually that's a really great segue into just talking about where people have failed Holden.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So many people who could have been there for Holden and simply could not. I mean, we opened the book with him visiting this teacher, Mr. Spencer, who basically looks at Holden and kind of has the same energy that exists throughout the book of like, well, when are you going to apply yourself, kid? And, doesn't really care much for Holden's actual experience. Is primarily just concerned with, is Holden going to be a, successful young lad who's going to do well in school and go on to, I don't know, maybe be a Mr. Spencer someday.
I think that I just really relate to, like, I had favorite teachers. I loved school. Like, school was such a source of stability, and like I knew the rules. I was good at it. And I had teachers who I think maybe knew something was up with me. I had written a story I wrote about death a lot, as like a 13-year-old. And I would like send that in. And I'm like, you must have known something was going on with me. And I remember also crying a lot randomly because I was 13. And anything would set me off, And one teacher was like, "What's going on with you? Are you okay?" And I was like, "My parents are getting divorced." And he was like, "Ah, that's rough." And that was the whole conversation,
Wow. And, on some level, teachers are employed to teach us math and writing.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that this responsibility should fall on teachers, but like, why are we setting up communities where there's no transparency into the home, into what's going on for
Right.
like, who was going to find out about what was going on for you and help you? I mean, nobody.
Yeah. And I think technically teachers have an obligation to report on like,
Sure.
Abuse of any kind. But I think that that can be hard too, because I wish that there was a place for kids to talk about what's happening to them, and that a whole village was accountable for a kid in a way. I mean, I say village like symbolically and metaphorically, but that like, for Holden, these teachers who are trying to help him, one is shaming him in the beginning. He like reads a shitty essay that Holden wrote out loud just to shame Holden into what?
I forgot about
succeeding? Like, what is he? He's trying to shock Holden into being motivated. And then Mr. Antolini is also saying something similar, being like, "Holden, I know the world's phony, but you gotta work with the world basically, or you can't just like not engage." And he's like, not shaming him, but he's not hearing him. He's not seeing him. Like, Holden just needs to be seen and heard, and acknowledged as a whole human who is going through an incredible loss.
That would go a long way. He probably needs more in terms of grief support and counseling, maybe after just such significant losses.
Yeah.
But yes, that would be a good starting point that literally no one is able to give him. I don't know that it's a memory. I think a family member told me it later. We were doing a getting to know you thing in kindergarten and or something like that. And a question was, what is your parents' favorite food? And I told my kindergarten class that my mom's favorite food was Chardonnay. And no one intervened. I mean, was there not a thought that, does Peter need some support? When a kid says that his mom's favorite food is wine. So yeah, it's discouraging to kind of, both of us, it sounds like, connect with Holden's experience of, okay, here's the adults that aren't out at home. Let me go talk to them and see what I can get from them, and not get much.
Yeah. I guess maybe I mean, I think times have changed in that I think adults are finally talking about what's happened. But yeah, we in that way, we're not so different from Holden. That I think a lot of systems failed us as well. And I
And
think
thank God we didn't, you know,
we didn't end up like Holden,
end up
but
like
we were,
Holden with intensely self-destructive behaviors.
yeah.
So, I mean, we have some, but
Yeah.
not maybe to the extent that Holden does.
We definitely, I didn't, I didn't do a lot of the things that Holden has done in this book, but it's not like I think that people who have been through what I've been through maybe did do things
Totally.
that Holden did.
And it just makes you feel compassion.
Yeah, that this person was really suffering. And I think what really hit it home for me and what made the book so devastating was in the end, he's at some facility because he's had his breakdown and he has pneumonia or whatever. And all they ask him is, "Are you going to apply yourself now?" That's all they ask him. Like that's what the best the therapist has for him.
There's just no chance for Holden.
Yeah, it just really feels like there's no love. No adult expresses or gives love to Holden in this book. And I hope that, this is why I wanted to do a project like this podcast, was to talk about ultimately love and giving loving kindness to other humans. And that's what I feel towards Holden. I just want to hold him, and I want to hold the me that relates too much to him, that relates so much to his pain. And I want to hold others who feel similarly.
Yeah, we want to send that loving kindness to ourselves first off and to the rest of the world, because there's a lot of Holdens out there.
Yeah, there really are. Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Peter?
No, I was just going to say that's a wrap. I feel like we did this book some justice with bringing our own experience and just really centering Holden, because this book is about his experience with his emotions, the lack of people in his life who could care for him, and the trauma he endures.
Yeah. So Holden and everyone who relates to Holden, we send you lots of hugs.
Sure do.
Yeah.
We're probably going to have a hug ourselves after
we will.
We finish recording this.
You can find Book Feels wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at bookfeelspodcast or email us at bookfeelspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.